So first, an apology that it's me again, rather than Jide Ashimi chairing this panel. Jide, who's known to a lot of people here already, is a hugely experienced mental health specialist working with South London and Maudsley SLAM NHS Foundation Trust. He's over 20 years of community-based provision, working too for initiatives that tackle experiences of inequality and discrimination in the health services. So I'll do my best to stand in for Jide, but I hope the experts on the panel will help me out if I get into any difficulties. So it's a bit of a change of having seen some really amazing, I hope you agree, illustrations of practice. We're not going to necessarily focus on that at the moment. Hopefully we can pick up conversations with people after this. But this panel is really looking at, we've seen that as good examples of practice. How can they really be built in sustainably into the fabric, both, as I said before, concrete and metaphorical of the health system? So that's the kind of main theme that we're covering together. And we hope this is the start of a bigger conversation about the future of this work. We can't cover everything, obviously, in half an hour, possibly slightly less now. But perhaps we can identify some approaches that might help promote, sustain, and develop this work in future. So, and I hope we can make time before the end to hear some thoughts and comments from the audience as well. So we've got a distinguished panel here this afternoon: Vivienne Reiss, Sophie Leighton, and this is in order, Andrea Craig, and Tim Shaw. Rather than take up more airspace myself, I would like to invite each member of the panel to spend up to 5 minutes introducing themselves and the part they are playing in developing arts in clinical settings. Then we can begin that broader discussion. So, Viv, would you like to start the ball rolling, and then we can hear from...
So just thank you so much for inviting me. Can you all hear me? It's fantastic to have a forum that's looking at clinical practice and also particularly looking at art and the built environment too, because the built environment is so important to where all this work happens. I'm an independent curator. My background's in galleries and museums, and I worked on public art projects. But over the last 10 years, I've worked for 6 different trusts and charities of trusts. So I've had lots of different experience in different healthcare settings. In 2020, I was awarded a Churchill Fellowship. The arts category that year, I mean, if anyone wants to know more about that, I can tell them. The arts category that year was art in the built environment, so it seemed like a bit of a no-brainer to apply. Unfortunately, COVID hit literally 2 weeks after I was awarded it, so I didn't actually get to travel for two more years. But the focus of my research is the integration of art and architecture in new capital buildings or refurbished programs, so art as part of the design process. I went to Denmark and Sweden, and then I went to Japan. Lots of reasons why I went to those countries, but particularly Denmark's worth highlighting. Since 2017, they've been overhauling their healthcare system, including health infrastructure. And they've worked with lots of artists on new builds. Sorry, it was 2007. Those programs are still going on, you won't be surprised to hear. And obviously we have the new hospitals program here in this country, very contested, but I wanted to look at how it worked somewhere else and what I could bring back, particularly to try and engage with people on those new programs here. I'm going to talk about my research, not what I do normally day to day, but I can bring that in later. So my research is online, it's in a report, it's quite lengthy, but there's 13 case studies and lots of great pictures. It was amazing. It's just, I mean, I'm sure you can all appreciate when you're head down doing the same thing, and to actually go out and see other projects was brilliant, and brilliant to see it in other cultural sort of situations. So it was really inspirational. The ways that art contributed to those hospitals were numerous. They were supporting wayfinding, design, functional aspects of the environment, making people feel welcome, cared for, relieving boredom, all the things you can imagine, introducing life, texture, multi-sensory experiences, creating character, identity, encouraging resilience, positive messaging, creating connections between people, and a sense of community and place, and also this civic institution. And really a lot of work latterly around personalising care and service delivery too. There were several overarching themes, I think, that laid the ground for this impactful art commissioning. So 2 main things to highlight here: the early stage involvement of curators and artists, which meant that the art was embedded into the projects, and also because it was embedded and early, it could broaden the forms and the role that art could play, so beyond just putting pictures on the wall at the end of a project. And the Percent for Art policy directive in Denmark and Sweden really enabled arts to flourish there. They have, it's a policy imperative, so they have between 1 to 1.5% on new builds. It links to the cost of the build. So like one budget for an arts scheme was 3 million, which, you know, is pretty phenomenal. Looking at projects elsewhere obviously makes you think about what you're doing and what happens here. And I think there's so much that we do really brilliantly here. There's this year, I think in the European Healthcare Design Awards, all the shortlisted projects are UK-based, and obviously there's growing networks with the NAN network, etc. Based on what I saw and what I know about here, I recommend a number of things. One in relation to policy and strategy and also research, but just quickly, in terms of policy, specifically increasing the profile, knowledge base and resource, highlighting art and environment initiatives in future creative health reviews would be great. Developing new multi-agency programs. So years back, 20,000, the King's Fund ran Enhancing the Healing Environment program with NHS estates and also the Department for Health. So it would be amazing to look at new schemes like that. And Percent for Art is something that we have had historically, and it's not just the money, it's also professionalising practice and protocols around how you commission that I was very impressed with when I was abroad. On a final note, there is great practice here, and I think we should be really shouting about the work that is happening in a lot of new commissioning projects where artists are leading co-design processes. So they're working with architects, project managers, clinicians, patients, and that's where the real coming together, I think, for not just creating artwork, but for new spaces and buildings, because other people don't know how to do that as well as we do. So I will stop.
Thank you very much. Sophie, would you like? Sophie.
Yeah, thank you too for inviting me to come along. I'm going to zoom right in after Viv's expansive sort of view of global design, right to Bethlem Gallery. So my name's Sophie, I'm director of the gallery. It's in South East London, based at Bethlem Royal Hospital, which is part of South London and Maudsley NHS Foundation Trust. The art gallery, just to give a bit of context, is an independent gallery. So our role is quite interesting because it means we're a critical space within the trust, and artists and staff and visitors really value that. So we run a public programme, we work with up to 200 artists a year, most of whom have experience of mental health services. And at the moment, we've got an exhibition, just to give you a flavour of what we do. We're working with an artist called the Artist Taxi Driver, or Mark McGowan, and he's a performance artist who's turned our gallery space into a live lounge, which is basically a shabby living room. But he, every day that we're open, there's open mics. It's full of instruments and gadgets and all sorts of things. And it's really interesting seeing how people from the community, so carers who are looking for programmes, are coming into the gallery space. Obviously, inpatients are coming in, and the public as well. Yeah. Yesterday is another example of how we work across the hospital. We work with artist Dolly Sen, and she brought an array of biscuits, a mini placard protest, and a giant ear around the site. And she was talking to staff and service users about why people aren't registering to vote as inpatients, or what might encourage them to vote. So it's thinking about other roles that arts and the hospital can play in sort of developing a better society. But what I've really been brought here to talk about is an amazing new building, Pears Maudsley Children and Young People Centre in Denmark Hill. And Bethlem Gallery were asked to produce the art strategy for that, and I'm an absolute imposter because the person who started it was Viv, and then the next person who carried it through brilliantly was Caroline Moore, who's also in the audience. Yeah, it's been an amazing project. So the Children and Young People Centre is all about bringing research and care into one building and working very closely with King's College London and SLAM to do that. So in terms of the art strategy, I think these might be Viv's words, we wanted the art in this centre to contribute to a therapeutic environment, really bring co-production deeply embedded into everything throughout the whole process. And what was important for King's and SLAM is to create a sense of place and connect to the local area and build up those local relationships through the development of the art strategy. So it's quite a lot to ask for from 3 commissions. So it was Caroline actually that brought together a group of young people connected to the Trust with lived experience, and they determined the artist briefs, working with Daniel Reagan, who's also here. And they selected the artists and they ferociously grilled them. I felt quite sorry for them. And they collaborated with the commissioned artists once the artists were selected. They chose Marcus Coates, Bethany Williams and Sarah Hersey. And the artists worked with the Young People's Art Group, but also young people at the Bethlem School and other groups of young people to create site-specific artworks, including a VR-drawn metal sculpture, a textile hanging piece, and abstract panels exploring themes of warmth and home. So, and due to the expanding deadlines, they're not installed yet. So we've just actually finished an evaluation report, and there's some really lovely quotes from young people, so I thought I'd just read out a couple. So one young person on the art group said, "I like learning about how art can work to convey different feelings. It was nice to learn about how work can set a mood and tone in different spaces. It was also good to see what happens in the practical sense when talking to the artists." Another one said, "It's been a positive experience and nice to give input in what I would like to see when I would walk into a hospital. I'm imagining how other people who are new to the place might feel and what might make them feel calmer and what impact the visuals might have, vibrant, full of sculptures and other things." The artists were brilliant, and they fed back to our evaluators that they were really surprised and also delighted about how much authority the young people had across the project. And the artist also talked about how much they learned working in a hospital space and thinking about things like health and safety. And the gallery team learned a huge amount too. So there's lots of things to think about that are, everyone's told us to think about in this report. It's about establishing expectations for participatory work. You know, who has the authority to make certain decisions along the way? The service users in workshops on wards get to determine what an artwork looks like, how much is the artist, all of those sorts of questions around power and art. Another thing that came through was that artists wanted to be involved right at the very beginning, even before the architects came on board, which would be amazing. and that they loved the reflective sessions that we set up with psychologists as part of the process, but also the evaluators. So we've got this far, and the next stage is to work with young people to think about how they can be involved in creative programming going forward, and then what does creative programming look like. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Andrea.
Hi, I'm Andrea. I'm a project director in North London, having just completed a project at the Wood Green Shopping Centre. My background's all healthcare management, and this was a very unusual project to work on. So I thought I was just going to give you some background to what a community diagnostic centre is within the programme, and then a bit about the process of engagement and delivery of the artwork that's now in the centre. So CDCs are a national initiative to bring in additional MRI scanning capacity to the population, to bring diagnostic testing closer to the community, and also, importantly, after COVID, to bring as much as possible of those tests away from the acute hospital setting. The Wood Green CDC is in the London Borough of Haringey, where previously there were no actual hospital services in the borough. So it was another reason why there was a desire to bring these diagnostic services into the local community. The CDC itself is actually based in the Wood Green Mall, which is owned by Capital & Regional, who are one of the partners who worked on this project with us. And the reason I particularly mention that is because it's very clear that one of the key things that Capital & Regional is keen to do is engage with the local community in a lot of the work it does, and that became very important as we developed the overall project, not just the artwork. The CDC in Wood Green is one of the first that was actually developed in a shopping centre. There are lots of others now being developed, but many other are in other sites, for example, another old community hospital sites. So this was very unique. A bit of detail, the CDC is hosted by the Whittington Hospital, which has been referenced already today. It employs about 50 staff. We opened in August 22, and we've seen almost 70,000 patients, about 80,000 tests, and importantly, about 80% of the patients who go to the CDC are from the most deprived areas of Haringey. The CDC operates 6 days a week, Monday to Saturday, and is open from about 8:30 to 7 p.m. And the reason I mention that, again, is because these are long hours for staff to be working, and the unit is in a retail unit in a mall, and the scanners are in the basement. So it was kind of quite a challenging area to develop for the design team. The ground floor is actually in what used to be a mobile phone shop, to give you an idea of the size. And the lower ground floor, where both scanners are, is in what used to be the plant room for the whole shopping centre. The CDC occupies about 1,300 square metres of space, 30% of which is plant room. At the outset, therefore, there was a lot of discussion with the design team about what the priorities were for the clinical services which could be safely delivered in this area. But key, apart from that, was actually the whole environment, both for staff working there and for patients. We worked with a fantastic design team. I'm pleased that our architect is here today and our artist. So I'm not just saying that because he's here, but there's a lot of thought given to lighting, the overall environment, cooling, as well as the visuals, including the shop front, which I don't think is on the images, branding, availability of wall space, and the well-being, as I say, for both staff and patients. It was very important right from the very beginning that we engaged with both staff and the local community. I'm pleased also that our engagement lead is here today, and she led a lot of the focus groups before the building work had actually even started, to understand what was important to the local community about the service generally, and what the sort of the feel that they wanted to have from this this unit. Once we had staff on board, we surveyed them as well about what they wanted to see in the internal area. And I think the combination of both of those had a kind of a number of common themes. So for example, it was a local service, belonged to the local community. It was a North London community. There are issues around culture, diversity, accessibility, sustainability. But I think the overwhelming two themes were that trying to bring nature from the outside in and how to make the basement not feel like a basement, which is literally what a number of people said. The process and of trying to bring in the artwork across the centre was that we had I worked with a great lead, Sophie, who's here today, and we developed a brief with the staff and the managers, so that the staff were very involved in determining what they wanted to see from artwork and how this should feel. It was interesting that a couple of people in our first meetings said, well, I don't think I can comment because I don't know anything about art. So it was quite an interesting comment right at the beginning of this whole development. We researched a number of other areas. Sophie went off to other hospitals that have been mentioned today, Chelsea and Westminster. We went to the Tessagel Centre, went to the Wellcome Collection. We attended webinars, and very importantly, we retained the services of Nikki, and also Vivienne helped us out really finding our way. I think Nikki's used that expression because it was so new to all of us. Once we'd identified a brief and identified the sorts of themes, we then worked with contacts from the mall and also a local charity, Hope and Haringey, to identify local artists because that was one of the requirements from the brief. We started off with about 6 or 7 artists who all came to visit the site and identified our preferred artist, who's Phoebe, who's here. It was really challenging because obviously this was a building site, so Phoebe needed to come on site to understand how this was going to feel, but there were no walls, there was nothing in the lower ground floor, so that was quite challenging. But we kind of got there, and Phoebe worked with us a lot, giving us our examples about the artwork, which you can see now on display. The two other parts that came together as part of the artwork on the centre were the photography. Staff had identified that on the ground floor there was less wall space available. So instead of doing murals, staff decided to take photographs of areas of North London that were important to them. And we've got about 20 or 25 of those on display. And we also took before and after photographs of both and during construction of what the site looked like and what it looks like now, which actually creates more interest than anything, really, because it's quite staggering what we were able to achieve. And then the final element was the branding. So again, going back to the focus groups from the local community, we developed with another organisation vinyl graphics to put on the shop front, and some of the themes from that were also used on the internal glazing in the lower ground floor as well. The feedback from staff is that they really love it. They love coming into the centre. They comment on the fantastic kingfisher that's in the stairwell. I spoke recently to a consultant radiologist who works in the reporting room in a dark room all day, and he says it's just fantastic to come out and see the bright artwork, but also how valued it makes the staff feel that so much work was given to the whole environment. And the feedback from patients, which we do collect as well, is that it's a distraction from the scans that some of them are about to undergo, but also calming and very invigorating. So, thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, Tim.
Hello, I'm Tim, and I'm one of the co-founders of an arts and mental health charity called Hospital Rooms. So we started, so my partner and I, Neve White, started the charity 8 years ago. It was after my best friend was sectioned after a suicide attempt, and seeing that space, it was very sterile and unpleasant, and it felt quite hostile. And we had the idea to think, why must it be this way? And perhaps we can work with artists and patients and staff in those wards to see if we could transform some of these places. So we did our first project, and it was a really interesting challenge because there's all these restrictions in inpatient mental health that aren't in most other healthcare settings. So, it has to be scrubbable. You couldn't have a framed artwork or canvas or something that could be sort of taken off the wall. So we were having to work about, we were starting to think about installations and how do we make things completely intrinsic to the building. And then that brought up other interesting ideas of the value of artwork, and some of the artists we work with, those works might be worth a lot. So actually they become part of the building. They can't be chipped off and sold to fix the roof. They also end up often changing the whole space. So on the first day, we got given the NHS colour palette for that space, and it was an awful palette. And the only way to get around it was to say every wall is part of the artwork, so the artist chooses that. And that kind of that first project, we learned so much, and how we could kind of get through some of the bureaucracy and make some really incredible and ambitious artworks for places that usually don't have any colour or any kind of stimulation. So since then, we've completed 23 projects, about 170 artworks, and about 800 in-person workshops. And you heard from Nafisa about our digital art school. But I'm going to talk a little bit about a project we completed last year, which was our biggest to date at that point, which was at Springfield Hospital, and which is at South West London St George's NHS Foundation Trust in South West London. They built a big new hospital, 2 buildings, one for outpatient and inpatient mental health and one for secure services. And it was interesting because we had a lot of firsts for us. One was the amount of collaboration. So we did 160 workshops with patients led by artists, some of that for an R&D stage, but then a lot of that informing the artworks that are made. And I think we might have some pictures of the workshops in the artworks, hopefully coming up. The collaborations we had, so we worked with lots of other organisations, and we've often worked with some organisations, but we realised that we'd started being able to kind of broker these relationships between the hospital and local cultural orgs. And so we worked with the Courtauld, so we led lots of workshops there. We were able to work with the hospital to get escorted and unescorted leave for patients to go on, have tours by academics and artists we were working with and have workshops there, as well as on the wards. We worked with Action Space. We worked with National Opera Studio on a really incredible project with Springfield Recovery College, where students were able to do a whole long course of kind of breathing and sound exercises. And in the end, it wasn't called an opera, but it is an opera, a kind of beautiful voice piece that is now a part of one of the artworks for the hospital, and we're able to have that in our exhibition at Houser and Worth. We were also able to make some of our most ambitious artworks, because we're often working in quite, they're decrepit, basically, a lot of these wards. They're sort of falling apart, and it sometimes feels quite strange to come in and say, we're doing an art project here, and a patient saying, could you get rid of the rats in the toilet first? And but it is important, and the new builds are different because we've got this kind of amazing canvas to work with. It's a completely different set of challenges, and the results were amazing because we had huge atria. We had 40-meter long walls we could make work with. We could do sculptural works. We could work with the architects while the building was still being built to say, don't put an alarm right in the middle of that wall, because it gives us the opportunity to do something much more impressive here. So we had 20 artworks in the end, and do we have the images? Is that, I don't know if we've got those images there, but we've got works by Herman Anderson, so when you're greeted by it when you come up the stairs to the secure services, if you're a patient or a family member for the first time visiting. We've got work in the family rooms. We've got 100 square metre murals by Yinka Laurie and Shutba Biswas. And I think we're trying to think about what can a mental health hospital look and feel like, and how can it make you feel. And the architects were really amazing to work with on this, because they'd created something really special. They'd made something that didn't look like a mental health hospital. And we've worked in so many new builds where they've knocked down a new build, a 20-year-old ward or unit, and made it almost exactly the same. But they'd really done something quite incredible here. And I guess the final thing to say is Teva Hesse, who's one of the architects, wrote a sort of little essay after the build, and he was talking about designing out and designing around. And I think it's something that we do, but we hadn't put so succinctly, which is that we take the worst ward with the most restrictions, and then we put that across every mental health hospital and trust. And then it means that all these rules are in place and all these inherited wisdoms, that things are the way they are for a reason. And all these Chinese whispers that are told, through these kind of generations of people working in these hospitals who are doing really hard work. But the one thing they're told about art is there's a reason why it's white, or there's a reason why it's beige, and there's a reason why we shouldn't allow people to do this, or there's a reason why stimulation is a bad thing, or red and yellow next to each other isn't right for anyone. And it's so unhelpful. So we need to start thinking about designing around and thinking about individual groups of people within a certain space. And it takes a bit more time, but that's part of the fun of it. So, the way that we work is working really intensely in these spaces, and then it produces something completely unique and special. And these are just a couple of examples of works from this project in Springfield. Alvin Kofi, that's about a quarter of this beautiful hand-painted mural. And it went through so much. One really interesting thing is these, one thing we're always told is never have figures in a mental health hospital. And we found that actually people like seeing reflections of yourself in a hospital. And it took so much to get to this point. And after all these workshops, we had all these figures, and there was one group of figure, and they were holding each other. And it's all about, the patients we were talking with here, we're talking about, it's about, there's people who do support you. But one of the security said that's the restraint hold. And so that we go, that's just an example of the process we go through, and then he changed it. We had a couple of changes, and by the end it's this beautiful walkway that you walk through, and it just feels like something really special. And Yinka Ilori made this, so there was a number of workshops with the Secure Service Shaftesbury unit there, and it led, and they were talking about hope and tomorrow, and all these shapes and colours came from these kind of chair painting workshops that turned into something really amazing. And I think we've got one more image. It doesn't matter if it doesn't come up, but the Herman Anderson is amazing, because you walk in, and we've a friend of ours was talking about how when she was a teenager visiting her mum at the same hospital and going twice and never going again. And it's because of what that environment was and what it said to her about her mum and about herself. So I think it's just an incredible thing. You walk into this Herman Anderson that surrounds you, feels like a forest. That's enough. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
I don't think we've got time for questions, have we?
No, sorry, we overran a bit with the tea and biscuits.
Yeah.
But hopefully you can catch people after the
Hopefully we can. Sorry, a few.
5 minutes?
Of questions? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. If everyone's okay to sit tight, because we have got one other very distinguished speaker with us. Questions. Yeah, at the back.
Hi, my name's David Boyd. I work for NHS Estates. I've been quite closely involved in the development of the St George's Health and Wellbeing Hub in North East London, in Hornchurch, which is just about to be completed and handed over. It's a brand new state-of-the-art 4,500 square metre wellbeing hub for integrated services across North East London. One of the things that I've been charged with recently is to develop an arts strategy for the building in order to be able to make sure that arts is embedded as a central pillar of the philosophy and vision for integrated services there. Now, I confess, I'm ashamed to confess in this distinguished audience, I'm a complete novice to art strategies and preparing all this, so I'm starting from absolutely nothing. So I was wondering really if the panel had any tips on the sorts of things that I should do or incorporate in an art strategy in order to make it sufficiently robust to act as a framework going forward over a number of years, such that a whole programme of arts activities, including installed arts and painted arts and performance arts and therapeutic arts, can be incorporated and developed and built on. I realise that big art strategy can't be started on day one, but we need something that will last and act as a guidance and a framework for going forward to develop all of these programmes. So any tips or do's or
Who'd like to go first? Viv.
Are you writing this on your own? Or can you...
Not after today.
To be perfectly honest, so far I have been, yeah. I'm not actually writing the answer. We're about to commission, hopefully, a professional to write the art strategy
that's
for
good.
it. So I've done the brief for the art strategy. I've done the brief for the art
Yeah.
strategy and had some input and a very helpful conversation with Richard only last week, so that's how
Yeah.
new I am to it. We think we might have funding to fund the development by a professional of the art strategy, but we plan any other advice.
I mean, personally, I think if you can get someone who knows what they're doing to work with you straight away, I'll talk to you later. Even if you haven't got all the funding in place right now, to have an art strategy helps you make that case, to talk to your colleagues, maybe to leave us some money from an interior design budget here or another budget over there, public realm budget, whatever. But also if you're going to need to do some fundraising, it helps with that as well. But art is so much more than just putting pictures on the wall, as you said, and the artistic process can be a really good way of engaging people along the way. So artists in residence, someone coming in early to do something like that would be great. When will the hospital be built?
It's built. It's about to. Hopefully, it will be handed over in August, and services will start in the autumn.
Okay.
Does anyone else add to that, or shall we have another question?
You're too late. That's the thing. You're way too late. But I would say, in the future, get in there earlier. Yeah. But I would say, don't scrimp on the strategy. No. Don't scrimp on the strategy. Put some money into it and do it really properly. When we did, we were quite late at 18 months before with Springfield, and it's not. I'm joking. It's not too late. You could do it 3 years after. But that was quite. We did. 40 of those workshops were just in trying to understand how this could work. And then the other thing is thinking about the legacy now. So the art that goes in there is great, but then also it's about what's going to happen in the years later, because it needs to be activated all the way through. And the thing that we're doing is, as well as kind of building these relationships, is a lot of staff training. So, if we're partnered with Tate St. Ives, we're doing look group training for the staff and for service users, so that it kind of continues there. So you haven't got this just sort of amazing bit of activity and amazing artwork going up, and then it's kind of left where it is. It's about thinking about the legacy and what's going to happen in the years to come.
I think that's a great question, some great answers. Thank you very much. I think we have to.
Can I just add as well that what I'm really impressed with is, and we were talking about this earlier, is when one person just acts on something. They don't wait for all the ducks to be in the row. Have I got a bit of funding? Never get off the starting blocks. It's you. I can feel your enthusiasm.
Yes, an incipient champion.
And, you're putting your head above the parapet and saying, exactly. I want to do this. Can somebody help me? So I'm sure there's many people in this room who will pile in one way or another to help. Okay. Have we got time for just one more? I'm looking at Paul. Are you all right for another minute? Yeah.
Anyone with another question?
How do you find your artists?
Very practical question there.
By fair means and foul, I think.
Who would like to answer that one? I mean,
on the Community Diagnostic Centre, we identified about 6 through local contacts, through a charity and through the shopping centre, because we wanted to use local artists. So we found 6 or 7. We approached them all, expressions of interest, got them to come back to us about their ideas, just concepts, and took it from there, basically. Oh, right. Well. This was, as I say, this was just local contacts. So we used the local contacts that we had in those 2 organisations, and said, because we knew they knew people, like the mall at Wood Green already has a lot of art around the actual shopping centre. So we knew that by asking them, they'd give us names, and we did the same with the charity, and we got other names, and we just approached them all and waited for them to come back just to say if they were interested, and then with their ideas. It was a lot. I mean, it was going back to the question before. It's a long process, and I don't mean that in a tedious way, but it's very exciting. But it takes a long time to get it all, so everybody's working together.
Sophie, did you want to add anything to that?
Just in terms of the Young People's Centre, Caroline will say a lot more, but I suppose we looked at what the young people wanted from the artworks in the space, then we thought about artists that might match that and all the different things that we wanted from the artists, like namely work in a really collaborative, participatory way, and then went out to them and then paid artists to come and present, and then the young people made the decision. So yeah, it's a very long process.
We should say there are more and more creative health posts now coming up in London and across the country. So I think we did have Flora here, and we've got Flora here from South East, and Connie as well. Where's Connie? Connie's over there. And, you know, eventually, and now I'm sure, that they're acting as a conduit, so they can gather in artists and then connect artists to clinical buildings or whatever else is going on. Yeah? Okay, so just leaves me then to thank all our panellists. Thank you very much. Again, it was an incredible spread of work. Thank you.
You stay here, I think. You stay here?
I think probably just stay if
here,
that's
yeah.
okay, yeah. And finally, to introduce, I'm very, very pleased to have here Dr. Paul Gilluley, who's Chief Medical Officer for North East London Integrated Care Board. I think I'm right in saying. Yeah. Thank you so much, Paul.
Firstly, thank you for inviting me along today to make some closing remarks. As well as being Chief Medical Officer at NHS North East London, my clinical background is as a consultant forensic psychiatrist. So for 30 years, I've worked in mental health. So I've been there with the beige walls that you get within mental health institutions, and those walls that just go on for miles and miles and miles with nothing on them at all. And I worked in a lot of the old asylums out in Epsom during my training, which were horrific places. But to be fair, some good things about mental health as well. Certainly during my time in mental health, I've worked with some fantastic art therapists, be the art therapists, be the music therapists, be the drama therapists, and I've really seen the impact from a therapeutic perspective of how that can work with people with mental health issues, be they long-term patients or be they outpatients or anything else. So that's the first thing, I think, and we've got really good evidence about the research evidence about the impact therapeutically of the arts, which I think is great. But I think we've moved along quite a bit in that in the last 30 years. We've started thinking much more about how we can use the arts in the well-being of our staff. Certainly I moved 12 years ago to East London Foundation Trust, and they've got a huge amount of people participation in East London at Elft. And through that, some of the art input through that, again, we had a staff and service user choir that got together actually and performed across the country. Massive impact from that. Massive impact as well working with Jim Pope and playing on and looking at the theatre company and how we engage our staff and our service users to develop a whole play, getting psychiatrists to swap to become service users and service users to become clinicians was really, really impressive. But I do think we've got a long way to go. I think I heard some fantastic things this afternoon and some fantastic things that are really going on, that are really pushing things forward. But I think still we see that arts and health is something of a luxury. And if there's anything that can be impacted on, or is there any savings to be made, the first thing will be the arts budget will be raided, or the arts therapy budget will be raided. And I think we have to stop it and actually start to make the argument. The medication budget is not raided. If the medication budget is not raided, why is the arts budget raided? It's not something special. It is not a luxury. This is something that's a given, and we've got the evidence there to show it's a given. So we really need to shout about it, and shout about it really loudly. I can try and do as much as I can from my position of power and privilege, but actually everybody needs to shout about it, and everybody has to see it's something that needs to be baked in. I agree with what we talked about this in the interval as well. I think, Tim, you're exactly right. It's a bit late. It is a bit late, but we still have to do it. But actually we should be thinking this right at the start and making considerable. I loved Vivienne talking about 1.5% of the budget should go to the arts right at the start when we're actually thinking about the building and what we're actually going to do. But can I ask one last thing? Because it's one of the things with the ICB we have to think about. And this event today is on clinical and thinking about clinical. But also one of the main pushes of the ICB is to think about how we can be preventative. Our health service is not really a health service. It's more an ill health service. So we wait until people are ill and then we start putting the input in. But actually what we have to start doing is making it a health service. And I think what you've got the opportunity with that to do is arts play a really important part in being a vehicle for that. To build resilience in our communities, to build resilience in individuals, you've got the arts that can actually impact on that at a much, much earlier stage. And we've seen some of that this afternoon. So I think when you're thinking of the clinical, and by all means thinking of the buildings and everything else is really important, but also think a wee bit beyond the box about how do we actually make the arts work to be preventative and build resilience in our communities. But thank you very much for coming along today, and thank you very much for inviting me. Take care.
Thank you very much, Paul. That was a call to arms. So I think that was what we were looking for for the end of the afternoon, you know, to go out there and spread the word and make this work more visible, to make its impact more widely known as well. So thank you to all our speakers and panelists, and thank you to the audience for coming and for the work you're all doing in this field. And I'm sorry there hasn't been more time for you to contribute. We needed a whole day, probably a whole week, you know, to cover the range of work that's out there. But I hope you've enjoyed it, and I think this will be the first of an ongoing conversation that we'll continue to have. So thank you very much.